What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. Me and Will are here to talk about news of another huge week in, U.S. politics and foreign policy, coronavirus, all kinds of crazy news to talk about on today's show, including the president contracting coronavirus and that breaking in just the past couple hours. So me and Will will be chatting about that, Assange, Russiagate, Afghanistan. Lots of important news. I think, when people look back at 2020, this week will stand out with the Assange trial and Trump getting corona, along with whatever, debate we had in the middle of the week, as being a very important week in American history. And Will, I'm happy to be here with you to start breaking it down for people. But before we get into the content, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. Make sure you're checking out the show at the show notes page on the Libertarian Institute. It's also up on the YouTube channel, so Conflicts of Interest. And then, make sure you're subscribing to the feeds. Conflicts of Interest, it should have its own feed on just about every podcatcher but iHeartRadio at this point. The people who are listening on iTunes are dropping amazing ratings and reviews. We got 20 plus reviews now, all 5 stars. And so... we really appreciate people doing that and sharing the show. I see a lot of people sharing the short clips that we put out on YouTube. We break down the show into all the little chunks that we talked about and makes for really great shareable content. So make sure you're subscribing to the show at different places. And then when you got the chance and you really like something, share the show and tell people to listen. Because, with just the state of politics right now, I feel like a lot of people are extremely frustrated with not only what the politicians are saying, but how the media is covering it. And me and Will do our best to bring a pretty fair voice and, an interesting take to things. We're not the mainstream media. We're not bought by Lockheed Martin. We're not trying to push a political, real agenda other than that of freedom and liberty and prosperity. So, Will, with that, should we get rolling into the big story today?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Yeah. So, as important as Afghanistan and Russiagate is, I really think that probably the most important story that will come out of this whole week, even over the debate, is the fact that Donald Trump has now announced that he has coronavirus. This happened just probably 3 or 4 hours before we're recording here, Will. So as far as all the details go, I'm sure stuff will come out. But from my understanding, it was White House advisor Hope Hicks that first tested positive, prompting both Donald Trump and Melania Trump to get tested, and they have now both tested positive. Other than that, as far as I know, there's no official details as far as did they test Trump once, twice, 3 times to make sure that this wasn't a false positive or somehow a mistake. And at least at this point, my understanding is that Trump is saying that he's going to start quarantining and that he is not showing any symptoms. He has just tested positive. So, Will, are there any details of this that I'm missing? Anything that's come out in the May past hour that I didn't catch?
No, I think this is such a new breaking story that there's not that many details out right now. We do know that the president and the first lady have contracted the virus. And yes, likely got it from the White House advisor, Hope Hicks, who a couple hours prior, it came out in all these reports, and then Trump himself actually came out in the Fox News interview, as those reports were coming out, and confirmed it and said, yes, I've now learned that she has contracted it and that my wife and I have been tested. And then within a couple hours after that, we then got the news from Trump himself. I think he was the first to announce it through his Twitter handle that indeed he had tested positive. And I guess I presumed that they probably tested him more than once and, maybe just did a couple samples all at once before he came out and announced it. But I have I don't have any proof for that at all. It could very well be that, he took one test. So there's not a whole lot of details out. I think the White House may have put out the White House physician or something is the president's in good hands or something some boilerplate stuff. But in terms of actual substantial details, there's not that much out yet.
Right. So let's, talk about this a little bit just because what could happen here? Obviously, the president's an elderly man, and as well as his competitor. I feel like that's something that we definitely talked about in Foreign Policy Focus. Just that while a lot of the death rates for this thing, especially for children or people under the age of 50, are really, really low, well under 0.001% and stuff like that. I think for kids it's 0.0005 or some ridiculously low number. But for some of these people who are in advanced age and Donald Trump, I don't think anybody would say is a shining model of physical health. I mean, he certainly looks fairly overweight. From what people have reported, and I haven't seen a whole lot, even his supporters really dispute that. The guy likes fast food. He eats a lot of beef and stuff like that. And so, not necessarily that means he's going to drop dead of coronavirus or anything, but it's not like, an 18-year-old high school athlete, football player contracting this thing where you're pretty much guaranteed that he's, at worst going to be sick for a couple weeks and then be absolutely okay. And so Will, what do you think? Are you concerned at all? I don't know. Concerned is the right word, but what are your thoughts on the, potential impacts on the president's health?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very real possibility. I think as of now, he is sort of asymptomatic. I mean, we've seen him in public, today. Like he doesn't seem to be, debilitatingly sick or anything. So as of now, it doesn't seem like he's too affected by this. But we do know that, yeah, like, elderly populations are way more vulnerable to this. I tend to think that some of the COVID stuff has been a little overblown. But like, if anything, that's something that has not been exaggerated, I think, is the threat that this poses to the elderly. That, if anyone, that is who should be protected here. They are the most vulnerable. And so Trump is definitely in that, population. He's not the first head of state to test positive for the virus, and we've seen Boris Johnson in the UK. I think he ended up in like intensive care. He's now recovered. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who I think most of the time he just kind of mocked it and said like, I'm fine. This is, I think he did remain completely asymptomatic. And so it could go in many different ways. I mean, we could see that, we could end up having Trump campaigning for president from an intensive care unit, or we could have him just simply, this doesn't affect him very much. But I do think nonetheless, this will affect the campaign. Like I think even if he has zero symptoms, I think he will still have to, even just for the sake of like the optics, to not get shredded by the media, to, kind of quarantine and stay in. If he has the virus and he's out there personally spreading it around, like they've already blamed him for killing all these people with the virus. But if he's doing that, I think that'll take it to another level,
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that this is going to change up Trump's plans at least until mid-October, if not later. Again, depending if he doesn't show symptoms, I guess I would suppose that at least 10 days, October 12th, 13th would be the quickest he would be able to get back out and start doing rallies. But my guess is 2 weeks would be the number they're probably looking at, so closer to October 15th. That'll certainly make a bigger difference for Trump than it would have Biden. Trump, I think, is actually out there campaigning and having some success at, whereas Joe Biden, this would just be another excuse to, hide in the basement. Now, we don't know the details yet as far as when it's possible that Hope Hicks got sick. So we have no idea when it's possible that Trump and Melania got this. However, we are just 2 or 3 days out from this debate here, Will, which means that Donald Trump potentially had coronavirus while he was in the same room as Joe Biden. And, I thought this presented something that we should really start considering as Americans, and that is, do we want the entire leadership of our country to be really, really old people? We saw this with, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where, for the left half of America, there are a lot of people who believe that, like, as a woman, they're no longer going to be able to, like, get a credit card because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is dead. Like, don't you think that's like a problem for our society if we're so reliant on old people, especially in the midst of a pandemic that's like really only serious for old people? There are several justices on the Supreme Court that are well into the, risk age for this. Clarence Thomas, Stephen Breyer are both old, and Clarence Thomas, again, doesn't seem to be the model of health or anything like that. Senators and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, as old as could be. Jerry Nadler, again, super old. Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell. All these people are extremely elderly. They have been in, for the minus Trump, pretty much everybody mentioned has been in government for decades, if not has made their entire professional career out of, politics and being in government. It seems like this should be a real wake-up call for Americans, that we have to, like, really adjust how we just let people stay in government until they die. Could throw a lot of chaos and a lot of floods if, you had 3 or 4 members of the Supreme Court get this or something, or even both presidential candidates. I mean, what would this do to the potential election if both Trump and Biden had this? and it both had serious, reactions to it. It seems like, again, both of these people would be in the group of people you would be increasingly concerned about getting this and having some serious health repercussions from it.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. I mean, like, I think I forget what the average age of both chambers of Congress are. I think it's like in the 60s. I think the average age puts the people in like the vulnerable, category. And so, yeah, that is kind of dangerous that we have this pandemic going around, and conceivably it could incapacitate like a bunch of our, like most, I wish they weren't such important institutions. I wish they didn't have so much power, but like these institutions with a lot of power over society, we are, risking them becoming incapacitated. Which I don't know. I guess when I put it that way, it doesn't sound so bad, but.
You're right.
But no,
there's like the jokes about Rand Paul when he tested positive after being in the Senate that, that could have been the most libertarian act in American history. And I mean, look, had those people not been able to vote post Rand Paul getting sick and they all had a quarantine, how many trillions of dollars would it have saved the American people? I mean, now being able to look back 6 months at that first round of COVID bailout, does anybody not think that the winners aren't like these mega corporations like Boeing or Amazon, and that it's just not the rich that have gotten richer off of the whole thing? I mean, are any average Americans really benefiting other than the $1,200 they got for the tens of thousands of dollars of debt wrapped up in their names over this thing? Government being shut down or being brought to a screeching halt probably wouldn't be the worst thing. I mean, I guess I don't want to see like mass death come out of these people. I'd rather, them be prosecuted and most of them thrown in jail for the war crimes and stuff they've supported over the years. But I'm not necessarily for them all just dying miserably of COVID. But at the same time, I do think it's something that the American people, if they really do, believe that they need a functioning government and everything, to really start thinking about, do you want super, super old people constantly running everything? And from my perspective, of course, I think the bigger problem is just the amount of corruption that gets wrapped up by somebody being in government for 4 decades or so, like, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. You just build power and power and power. Somebody asked me why they thought Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't retire in like 2015 or something like that, when she would have obviously been replaced by an Obama justice. I posted the meme of Chancellor Palpatine after he's gotten hit by Mace Windu, and then Anakin kills him. He goes, "Absolute power." That I think that's really it for these people, that they just can't let go of the power and the influence that they have until the day they drop dead. I mean, look at John McCain. Even when he had brain cancer, he was, spending pretty much all of his energy trying to, fight what he saw the battle Trump there and, hold on to all the power and influence that he could. John Lewis was in the House for decades on decades on decades until he died. Right. I think, Elijah Cummings, I think he retired before he died, but he was like blind and, the prime years of his life are well past him. And look, me and you, Will, being, we're both younger men here, and I think millennials are now close to, if not the largest voting group. And not that I think we could change the world by voting or anything, but just to reflect of, what the American population looks like. It looks nothing like our government. And if you talk to a millennial, there's a huge cultural difference between us and the boomers. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, we're not like those people a whole lot, yeah. And people wonder why it doesn't seem like the government reflects, the, kind of the soul of the American people. Well, it's because they're from 2 generations and don't reflect the American population anymore. So, those are just kind of all things that have came to mind. The last, I think, thing I just thought about that we'll get details on, we don't know yet, but it's going to be really important and a big topic of conversation, which is future debates between Trump and Biden. I think this coming week is a vice presidential debate. As far as I've heard, Mike Pence isn't involved in any of this. I don't think he was with Donald Trump at the most recent debate. From all the pictures I saw, I think only Trump's family was there. So I don't know if there's a reason to think that Mike Pence may have contracted coronavirus or not, or could possibly be positive. So I don't know if it'll affect the vice presidential debate, or if anybody even cares about the vice presidential debate at this point. However, it seems likely to me that this will in some way change what a future debate between Trump and Biden looks like, if not just cancels them, as it doesn't seem like it would even be possible to have one of those debates before mid-October.
Yeah, I mean, there already was talk. In fact, Wolf Blitzer, like 5 seconds after the first debate ended, said like cast doubt that there would even be another debate. I'm not so sure there will be another one of these. And it's like that was immediately after well before Trump contracted COVID. And now with that, I think it will be a very easy excuse for them to just call these things off, especially after what I don't know how well the ratings did. Maybe that will encourage some people to put it back on. But I don't know. I think after that first one, they might not do it again.
Just my last thought on this that I had that I thought was somewhat important is just we haven't really seen what the reaction to this is, because it broke pretty late Thursday night. I say like 10, 11 o'clock Trump sent out the tweet, right?
And I think it was like midnight even, Friday morning, yeah.
Yeah, so pretty late. I'm on Central Time now, that's why. Yeah,
right.
That's pretty late, so we'll see what comes. But I think people are really gonna try to rub it in and be like, look how stupid Trump is, he got coronavirus. I really don't think that's a big deal that Trump got coronavirus. I don't know if it'll affect the outcome of the election unless Trump develops symptoms and is unable to make any public appearances and is sick for longer or has to quarantine for longer than 2 weeks. I think that would become an issue for him. But if he's asymptomatic for 2 weeks after testing positive, I think that actually may be a little bit of a boon to him to be like, look, I've now battled this thing. I've had it. I've experienced it. I survived it. And so he has a little bit of antidotal, maybe political capital with that. And especially if like Joe Biden also has it and then shows symptoms. But I think this could really end up throwing the political or in the election into a major shift or turn, depending again on when Trump is recovered and if Biden was impacted by this. But right. I'm guessing, Will, this is going to be one of those stories that we'll be talking about again and again over the next couple of weeks, as we are now a month and a day out from this election. Anything else on that, Will?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much hit it. I think this has a very big potential to be huge, or it could be, have very little effect. I think it'll depend a lot on whether the president shows symptoms and how much this actually affects his health.
All right, moving on here. We have a story from RT, although not written by the great Will Porter, that's titled "Hillary Clinton Cooked Up Russiagate Smear to Smear Trump and Distract from Her Own Scandals," declassified doc suggest. So what is this document, Will, that suggests Hillary Clinton was at least involved in cooking up Russiagate? And how important is this?
Yeah, we actually have this disclosure actually was a couple different pieces of information, and it's like the latest in a series of document dumps over the last week. I think on the last show, I think, or the second to last show, we covered the ones that came from Michael Flynn's defense attorney, showing that the FBI was kind of like concerned that maybe their investigation into Trump would get them into trouble. We have the one we also covered the ones from John Durham on the whole Steele dossier thing. Durham is doing a criminal investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia probe. But now this week we have a release from John Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence, the guy who like oversees all the intelligence agencies. And unfortunately, I don't think they actually put out the documents themselves publicly yet. Like they were just declassified. But what we do have is a summary of this material from Ratcliffe in a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee, specifically to Lindsey Graham, who chairs that committee. So like I said, there was 3 pieces of information. The first one is sort of what RT led with in that headline. It has to do with the U.S. says now, according to Ratcliffe, that they, in the summer of 2016, obtained this Russian intelligence assessment where like they're just presumably speaking amongst themselves internally, where they're saying they believe Hillary Clinton was going to try to manufacture a scandal about Trump and Russian hacking and collusion and all that, which, is pretty consistent, I think, with our take on it, that is what happened, that she manufactured this. But we have now the Russians apparently talking amongst themselves about this. Now, of course, a lot of people in the mainstream press, the corporate media, are immediately dismissing this as, oh, this must just be like disinformation that was deliberately planted there, and it's unverified intelligence and all this stuff. And I think it's amazing how suddenly they start caring about, unverified intelligence. They didn't seem to, they don't seem to mind basing every other story they write on some unverified crap from U.S. intelligence agencies, but from another agency, now they're going to get skeptical. And like, to be fair, like I will say, I can't prove that this first piece of information is not Russian disinfo. Like, I think I always try to acknowledge when something is just a claim, especially when it's from an intelligence agency. But the people who are just like like assuming that it must be disinformation, I think are also sort of speculating without evidence. Very well could be Russian disinfo, this intelligence assessment, but it also could suggest that the Russians were aware of what was happening here with the Clinton campaign and were discussing it internally. I think we can at least raise that as a possibility.
Right, and can I just add real quick, the fact that this
Yeah.
wasn't released by the Russians and only comes out through American intelligence 4 years after the report, I guess raises a little bit of questions as to if this was supposed to be some kind of counterintelligence like initiative. Why the hell didn't they do something about it sooner? It certainly doesn't seem like they would have had to wait for Ratcliffe to release it 4 years later if their goal was to put this into the record, back in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could just say that, oh, they were just trying to put stuff out there that hoping the U.S. would sort of pick up on the trail and like, draw some conclusions from it. But again, like that's totally speculating. I don't have any real reason to believe that's what happened. However, there were two other pieces of information that all kind of track in the same direction about the Clinton campaign. Because Ratcliffe also said that there are handwritten notes from Obama's last CIA director, John Brennan, showing that he had actually briefed Obama on this stuff about Clinton, specifically about how one of her foreign policy advisors had floated this idea to start, telling tales about how Russia loves Trump and was, interfering in the U.S. election and all this stuff. And so apparently John Brennan had written about this in his own notes and talked to Obama about it a little bit. We don't know exactly what he told Obama, whether like, this is a good or bad thing, because we have some indication to believe that John Brennan himself was sort of involved in pushing this claim early on. It could very well be that he briefed Obama that like our plan is going ahead, accordingly or something. We don't know exactly what he talked about, but according to Ratcliffe, Brennan did write about this stuff in his notes, that the Clinton campaign was trying to spin up this whole scandal around Trump. And then the final thing we have is this final document that, again, they just declassified it. We don't have the document itself. But according to Ratcliffe, just before the 2016 race ended in September 2016, U.S. intelligence officials actually forwarded a report to the FBI, again, about how Clinton had approved this proposal to frame up Trump for this elaborate Russian conspiracy thing. And at that point, in September of 2016, the Clinton campaign had already started doing this. They were talking about hacking and all that stuff. They'd begun on this whole conspiracy theory. So these three pieces of information have like one common thread, I think, that like people within the intelligence community are suggesting that the Democratic candidate plotted to make up a scandal and what amounts to like an allegation of treason against the president. Like we have the CIA director, John Brennan, putting this in his notes, briefing Obama about it. We have this report that's apparently forwarded to the FBI, and we can imagine that they just kind of ignored that. Apparently it was sent to James Comey and Peter Strzok, by some lower level person in the agency or the bureau. And then finally, we have this thing about the Russians putting it in their own intelligence assessment. So that's sort of what we have with these new documents. And all three things kind of all go in that same direction with the Clinton campaign and her attempt to frame up Trump for this whole Russia stuff.
Right. So, well, I think the dates on this are really interesting because a lot of it's like the summer of 2016 that it seems Hillary Clinton is 100% on board with this. And there's two things that really stuck out to me about that. One is that she was really concerned. It was then, the administration that she was previously a part of that was still in power. And so it seems like, there would have been the opportunity for her to like help push for an investigation or something to try to get the truth to the American people before the election. But it seems pretty clear that that wasn't at all a part of the goal. And this was more of a PR or political move. And, it was only focused on the election. It wasn't focused on actually, trying to get to the potential truth of her rival candidate being a puppet of a enemy state to the United States. I think that was, that there's some discrepancy there that's hard to explain if you're Hillary Clinton as to if you really thought this was true. How was it that, first of all, you weren't talking about from the, very beginning all the time, if your candidate's a traitor, that seems like a pretty big deal. And, for the most part, I feel like during the actual election, it doesn't come up very much. And in fact, during this time, it's Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama slamming Trump for in any way, suggesting that the election may be illegitimate. Trump was sowing discord. And it's not until she loses that they go into hyperdrive on this, and they insist that it must be Russia involvement that caused her to lose and all that. And then the other thing that really stuck out is just how involved Hillary seems to be in this now, which I think is a bigger scandal than if it was more her campaign. And then, she kind of adopts the line after she's convinced of it when she loses the election. But rather, she was on board with this from the very beginning. And maybe the sourcing on this is wrong. But if that's the case, then she has a lot more to answer for to the American people, because this whole fake Russiagate scandal has, in a lot of ways, really destroyed parts of the country and really hurt American foreign policy and U.S.-Russia relations. And most importantly, getting rid of any momentum to get rid of nuclear weapons whatsoever is completely gone now. And it seems like, not only the U.S. and Russia, but now several other states are putting their foot on the gas pedal to make more nukes, potentially mainly China, I'm talking about there. And, had the U.S. and Russian relations been better, we're working on building more nuclear control deals. I think China's less motivated to make more nuclear weapons. Even with, Trump's hostile rhetoric, if he's not talking about ramping up the, nuclear warfare against Russia, China's probably less worried about, the U.S. nuclear arsenal. So those are just kind of the big things that I was thinking about when I read this story.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the first point you made there, and the other ones too. But just to elaborate a little more on what the first one, that Clinton, it does seem like at some point her campaign decided that they're going to launch this attack, that they're going to, they're plotting this whole attack on Trump about how he's a Russian puppet, and it doesn't seem like it was something they sort of organically came to that conclusion. It does seem like they her campaign put this together as a strategy of how to explain, either losing the election or to try to, slightly beforehand to try to, tank Trump with that. So,
right. So, Will, is there any, I don't know, documents potentially coming, or is there anything else that you heard from Ratcliffe, or and other indication that we could get more information on this to help confirm whatever was in the Russia intelligence report, or whatever else what came out through these documents? Or is it going to be, hopefully a really great journalist like Gareth Porter reads this, goes out there, and it has to do the legwork to confirm it, or if government plans on releasing more documents or something like that?
I haven't seen any explicit indication that that could happen, but I think it's not. I think the Senate now has these documents that have been declassified by Ratcliffe, and so I guess maybe they could, I think, put that into the public record if they, were willing to do that. But yeah, unfortunately, I think we have to kind of rely on people like Gareth Porter and investigative journalists to dig that stuff up. I'm not too confident the government's going to put that out, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, we do have Rand Paul, and not that I think Josh Hawley is, a libertarian senator or anything, but at least two senators who I do think kind of understand Russiagate. I don't know if they understand to the extent that me and you do, but I do think they understand that this was a coup attempt against the president. And understanding that, maybe they will read stuff into the record, especially if Trump's having trouble campaigning or something and needs some wins. Boy, that would be some big wins to, drop and distract everybody from Trump's coronavirus. More proof that, potentially Hillary and the Obama administration in some way were involved in cooking up this whole Russiagate scandal against Donald Trump, which, I mean, has been so destructive for the American people. And I get, not to mention the fact that Hillary Clinton has since spun this narrative against anti-war progressives and, women of color like Tulsi Gabbard, right? Where it's because of this narrative that she's able to make the completely unfounded and slanderous allegation that Tulsi Gabbard, who's a active duty, I think, National Army Guard medic, major serving, who has served in Anbar, Iraq, as being somehow a traitor to her country because, she doesn't believe this whole Russiagate thing. The narrative is just so powerful that if they're involved with this and that they've had something to do with it, they're just, some of the worst people for destroying American society. But maybe a lot of Americans will get really, really pissed off about that. And I think they would take that out on, by at the very least, not voting for Biden, but potentially even voting for Trump. I think this could be big.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess last thing I'll say here, you're talking a lot about just how effective this Russiagate stuff has been to U.S. foreign policy. I would encourage people to read our long write-up on this at the Libertarian Institute, Dangerous Game. If you just Google Dangerous Game, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, Libertarian Institute, you'll find our big write-up on the fallout of Russiagate overall. So that's worth reading, I think.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde makes excellent CBD products. Their website has all the different products that they sell on the shop page. I personally really like the CBD extract. You just take a little bit of it and about 1 milligram put in your mouth, and pretty quickly it starts to take effect and for me relieve some back pain and some tension. I've been talking about my big move recently. I spent about 18 hours in the car in one day. I did the driving for about 13 hours of that myself. And I gotta say, the next day I expected to be pretty sore. I doubled my daily CBD intake, and things I gotta say have been pretty great. You know, a little soreness, but not too much discomfort really. And I think a lot of it has to do with the CBD products really helping with that information. So check out Paloma Verde. They are, legit CBD products. These aren't the gummy worms that you buy at the head shop. These are, pills that, make sure that if they say there's 10 milligrams of CBD, that there's, 40 milligrams of CBD. That's what's in those products. And then you could learn about CBD on the website, and, how it could help you and how you should take it. So everybody visit PalomaVerdeStore.com, and links are in the show notes page and on the YouTube channel, so very easy to find. And then once you got your all of your CBD products picked out and you're in the checkout line, all you do is you type in the promo code PEACE at checkout, and when you spend $75, you get 25% off. You can also sign up for the mailing list at PalomaVerdeStore.com. And when you do that, you get additional 10% off your first order. Will, let's get back to the show.
Right.
All right. So pretty much, one of the huge things that we've talked about through the first 15 episodes or so now of Conflicts of Interest has been Julian Assange's trial and, how that's been going. We're on week 4 now, and that looks like it will be the last week of witness testimony. And so there's a lot of, kind of important stuff that's happened this week. And we also want to take some time to talk about, this story that Matt Blumenthal wrote up, but this larger UC Global scandal where it's very clear the rights of Julian Assange have been thoroughly violated by the CIA, using this cutout UC Global to spy on his privileged conversations with his defense attorneys and lawyers, and potentially even plot the poisoning and killing of Julian Assange. So, Will, maybe we should just start with some updates on the trial. Any big takeaways from what's happened in the past week?
Yeah, I guess real quick, just because we are now approaching the end of the actual testimony in his hearings, maybe we can just kind of swing back a little bit and recap what's been said before we get to this week. So just they have covered quite a bit of ground over the last couple of weeks. They've talked about the fact that Assange published classified material in his role as a journalist, and that this was done in the public interest, not as some kind of cyber criminal hacker or something. They've talked about how the charges against him are politically motivated, how the U.S. is sort of has an axe to grind. They've discussed the conditions that Assange might face in the U.S. if he's extradited, in the prison he might end up being in, and the solitary confinement and those conditions, as well as his mental state and whether he's a suicide risk. So that's sort of a lot of stuff that we've heard over the last couple of weeks. They've also touched on some of the hacking stuff, which I think is very important. Because that's the basis of some of his charges. He has 17 counts under the Espionage Act, and there's a couple that have to do with computer intrusion. For example, the government claims that Assange was involved in some kind of password hacking attempt. But there have been witnesses recently, I think even just this week, or it may have been last week, but who've challenged that idea of the password cracking, saying that Chelsea Manning did not even hand over enough information for someone to be able to do that, to crack a password. So this witness is saying it's not even possible that anyone made an attempt to crack any government computer or password. And this actually had come out in Manning's own legal case. Actually, as Kevin Gostel has written about and pointed out. In fact, people should go read his recent article, "Prosecutors' Password Cracking Conspiracy Theory Against Assange Unravels." That's, Google those terms and read up that article. There's a lot of interesting points about the hacking stuff. The defense has also raised the point that Assange's name wasn't even on the chat account that was used to communicate with Chelsea Manning. It used like a pseudonym of Nathaniel Frank, I think. So that there's actually no proof that like the person communicating with Manning, who's presumed to be Assange, there's no actual proof that it was Assange. That's sort of just like a supposition by the government. And they could not prove it was Assange during Manning's trial, and they still can't prove it now. So I think that was like a very strong point for the defense to have aired in court.
Can I just stick one more detail in there, Will? And apparently that account was used by multiple members of WikiLeaks. Yes. With the intention of giving like plausible deniability that you don't know who was using that account. And so that seems like a important point to me that I didn't even know about until Kevin Gostola recently said. That wasn't even that, they think this account was used by Julian Assange. They know this account was used by multiple people. And so that seems to be a real problem in their whole story here, that unless they have a particular way to prove that it was Julian Assange on in the chat, then I don't know how you could possibly claim that he was involved in the hacking of these passwords and stuff. I think you would have to be able to find some way to show that it was actually him and not someone else, and it doesn't seem like they have any ability to do that.
Yeah, that part adds like a whole other layer of like deniability to this whole thing. Like even if it had just like been assumed that it was only one person using it, they still didn't have proof it was Assange. But now that we know that multiple people have used this, then like you can't really it's really hard to pin this on one specific person, which you would think their whole case would kind of have to rest on that, showing that the guy who they say did the thing. But I don't know. I guess that's that's how the law works sometimes. However, this week, though, as you mentioned, I think one of the very most important parts of this whole the whole extradition hearing, I think, is the subject of UC Global, this Spanish security firm that was hired to guard the Ecuadorian embassy in London while Assange was holed up there, at least for like the second half of his stay there. This company is run by a Spanish guy named David Morales, who also like heavily factors into this whole thing. There's actually been quite a bit of reporting on this in the Spanish press over the last year. Especially a newspaper called El País, where they've been reporting on this a lot. There's also been a big legal case that's still ongoing in Spain as well, where David Morales, the guy who runs this company, has actually been charged for some of the stuff that you mentioned about the spying and stuff. So the story has been out for a while now, but we did hear a lot about this in the hearing this week. So this company is believed to have struck a deal with the CIA to spy on Assange while he was at the embassy. And we do know like Morales did at one point order his team to like beef up the security there. Like they, I think, added audio. Previously it was only video surveillance, and he added audio to that in the building. So I think he beefed up some of the surveillance there, and reportedly he was sending this back to the CIA. And a major part of this is like he was apparently also sending back Assange's private discussions with his lawyers and stuff. And as I was saying to you before we went on air, like usually that would kind of get a case thrown out. This is something Joe Loria recently pointed out at Consortium News, that like if it's found the government is spying on somebody, like spying on their defense preparations, or paying somebody to do it, as would be the case here, that can get a case thrown out, because like Assange was indicted under seal for like a year before it was ever announced and before he was arrested, and I'm sure he was aware of that. And so like this whole year before his arrest, he was very likely preparing for the very case that he's facing now. And so if the CIA is spying on him, while he's preparing for that, again, you'd think that should get this kind of tossed out. And that's actually what happened with Daniel Ellsberg, that he was slapped with Espionage Act charges. And it came out in the court case that they had wiretapped him, the government did, and that got everything dismissed. And so like, I was even seeing Ellsberg saying this himself, that he thinks that could set up a similar precedent here, that Assange's charges could be thrown out if this is proven that they spied on him. And that does seem pretty clear, too. Like we have witnesses who actually testified anonymously during Assange's hearing. But we have witnesses saying that UC Global was not only surveilling him with video cameras and stuff, but also they were stealing documents from Assange that had relation to his defense. They were trying to get samples of his DNA and fingerprints and stuff, and as well as I think something you've mentioned on the show, trying to steal a dirty diaper from a baby who was regularly brought to visit Assange in the embassy, who I think did end up turned out to be his child.
Yes.
And all of that was apparently done at the behest of the CIA. And so like that is also stuff that is pretty damning in terms of like them spying on Assange, especially stealing documents and stuff. That's like, you know, really spying on his defense preparations. And you also, the last thing I'll say here about how UC Global was mentioned in the hearings, you mentioned this, but like the most scandalous thing is the story where they apparently discussed kidnapping or even poisoning Julian Assange with their American contacts, these Spanish security people. And unfortunately, I don't think they got into a ton of detail about that in the testimony that was read in court. But nonetheless, this was mentioned. Just the fact that, like, indeed, UC Global had talked reportedly with their American contacts about either kidnapping or poisoning Assange. So that's pretty insane. And that's basically my recap, I guess, for this week so far.
Yeah, I mean, solid recap there, Will. As I mentioned at the start, this does seem to be the final week. This Friday, the 2nd, will end the testimony from witnesses, and we will not hear verbal testimony. I believe we got this confirmed from Noam Chomsky, who I believe is still like the top linguist in the world. Like, as far as like the field of psychology goes, like Noam Chomsky is like one of the most important names. I think as a psychology major, his name probably came up along with like a few other people like Jung as much as anybody else, and as important as anybody else. So, you know, they're not going to hear the testimony from this you know, top psychiatrist, Patrick Coburn, one of the most important journalists that we have, especially reporting on the Middle East wars since the Arab Spring. He's not going to be able to testify, and probably the least well-known name, but I think the most important testimony that we're not going to actually get to hear is Andy Worthington, who has been just heroically reporting on all the torture program stuff all these years. And he could have gone up there and really talked about how important that Assange's documents, well, not Assange's, Chelsea Manning's documents that were released by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange were to really putting together the whole story of like the torture program and everything like that, and helping to get some, I don't know if you could call it justice, but at least less screwed for some of these people who were treated so poorly by us after 9/11. And it's very unfortunate that the court is unwilling to hear that. I know for Julian Assange, it seems like that's probably the most important thing. One of his main outbursts at the trial was around the fact that they're not letting the torture victims be heard, which is you know, absurd. Like, if you're going to like expose a torture program, you should be able to hear from the victims of that program to explain why, you know, you went and exposed it and how terrible it was. But you know, they don't want that to be heard, because then it's going to be very hard to throw that guy in jail. And
Right.
I suppose, I mean, of course, John Kiriakou kind of disproves that in some ways. This is the guy who blew the whistle on the CIA torture program and then was the only one jailed for it. But, you know, him along with Assange and the Chelsea Manning leads are just so important, and yet they're the only people that are targeted. Not John Brennan, not Gina Haspel, not Dick Cheney, not, you know, David Tennant or John Yoo, and any of these people who are George W. Bush. I can't forget his name. All these people who, you know, should be in jail for rounding up random Muslims and torturing them. You know, in the middle of our woke moment, we somehow forget that, you know, the now enlightened George W. Bush just randomly picked up in Muslim people because they were Muslim and tortured them at times to death. That's okay, and he could say it the game with Ellen, but Donald Trump is the evil. Anyways, Will, that gets left out of the court is so important and so disappointing. It just shows that this really isn't about justice or making sure that people are safe, the rule of law is upheld, and that kind of thing, but rather an attempt to cover up the crimes of governments. And the, you know, the UK government is tied into most of the crimes of the US government, so it's not surprising that they're helping facilitate this. The last thing I'll mention is just going back to the UC Global thing real quick, and Mads Blumenthal, you know, points this out, is all those years that UC Global was spying, or I think it was at least 2 years, they're spying on Assange. Several mainstream journalists, you know, people who work for organizations with massive legal teams and budgets, were also spied on. Their phones were scanned and stuff like that, and yet they don't seem to have any interest on reporting on this. I mean, I would imagine that if the Trump administration did that to these people, they would have been outraged and lost their minds. But here, it seems like not that big of a deal to any of them that, the U.S. government spied on them while they're going to meet with one of the, most important and heroic, leakers or whistleblowers or journalists, that's we've ever had on the planet. And so it's a very I'll link to that article from the Gray Zone by Matt Blumenthal on that for anybody who wants to read that. I'll throw that in the show notes page. It's pretty solid and a good piece on just how all these mainstream journalists don't care.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend people go read that. It really does kind of show like, there's a real difference between, like, you can just tell the distinction between, he mentions like how Glenn Greenwald and the Italian reporter Stefania Marizzi of the La Repubblica, they've written about this, about how the UC Global guys tried to spy on them and go through their devices and all this stuff. Whereas you have this Post journalist who, according to this, I think someone leaked this to Blumenthal. He has like these handwritten notes from a UC Global guard, apparently, that like the guy's talking about how he tried to take the voice recorder from this Washington Post reporter. And that reporter went and wrote about her visit with Assange, but did not mention the part where the security guard tried to spy on her. And I'm sure now a lot of these journalists are aware of the allegations against UC Global, that they worked with the CIA to spy on Assange and sort of like feed information to the Americans. And they're still, their mouths are still shut. And you pointed this out the other day, I think on the HAPA show that we went on with our friend Shane Skelf. But, they could very easily tie this into Trump's so-called war on journalism or whatever. It would be effortless for them to make that argument. But I guess they just hate Julian Assange so much, like, because of, his leaks of the Podesta emails and Hillary emails. I guess, like, he's just become, like, they just hate him so much that they won't do that. They maybe even hate him more than they hate Trump himself, which is, I don't know how that's possible, but it does sort of, I don't know, you sometimes get that idea.
Yeah. Well, one of the, very great points that Scott Horton always makes about the whole thing isn't just that they don't seem to care about Assange, but they've really profited over his work off of his work over the years. So many Pulitzer Prize stories and thousands of news stories have been written using the documents released by Julian Assange. They have been critical to, providing the necessary evidence that like ties together different, sourcing reports and stuff. They'll get a couple unnamed sources to say something, but when you have the actual document from the government behind it, then you're actually confirming stories. And that's what Julian Assange put together for, a lot of these journalists. And now they completely turn their back on him. And it's not just on him. It's also on journalists, like you point out, Marizzi, who I think is really trying to get some other journalists to like sign on to her lawsuit against UC Global and, to be like, and they won't. And it's so disappointing because, this is a girl that they'll kind of try to outcast as, she's not part of an outlet that Americans have heard of. It's not the Washington Post. It's not like the Guardian in the UK, even international stuff. If it's a big enough name, maybe people will pick it up, but it's
Republican, not so much.
Yeah, it doesn't. Who even knows what language that is? Well, it could be Spanish or whatever.
Armenian.
Yeah, right. But that's kind of the position that she's in. And if other journalists would stand with her from the Washington Post, and that would give so much ground. And again, the war on journalism would be so easy to play up, but we're not seeing any of that here. And it's obvious that it's because they hate Julian Assange for, I have no idea why, I guess, giving them all those stories over the years. It's not like he hoards the documents or anything like that and just, writes up the stories himself and then releases them and steals all the credit for all this. He just gives the documents. So I guess the last thing I'll mention about the Assange case is I'm not sure when the next Assange update will be. Maybe it'll actually be about the UC Global case, which has been going on in Spain kind of as this other case is going on in the UK, the extradition hearing. And it's very interesting that it doesn't seem like there's really any interest in kind of reporting those two stories together, especially in the U.S. mainstream media. It really only comes from the alternative media, Caitlin Johnstone, Matt Blumenthal, who are writing, hey, look, it's really strange that you have, them looking into the fact that they spied on Assange's privileged conversations here. The case precedent with Daniel Ellsberg is very clear that when they tried to or planned to break into his psychiatrist's office to get those privileged conversations, that they then had to drop the charges against him. Seems like it would be a very nice overlap and story to tell, but no interest in reporting the UC Global story at all. And if it does get mentioned, it's an aside from the extradition hearing itself. And the two need to be tied together because they're very tied together and very important together, especially because I think Assange felt unable, or his defense was partly compromised because of all the information the U.S. government and therefore the U.K. government has about his plans for defense. Then I think we're supposed to get written closing arguments within a couple of weeks of each side. But, I don't know how much is what's going to matter or not, because the entire case that the defense team put together was off of the original indictment that the U.S. had put out. But they then introduced the superseding indictment later. And I don't think they really heard any evidence or witness testimony on the allegations in there that Assange was involved in other hacking or encouraging other people to hack different files or different things aside from Chelsea Manning and the State Department cables and all of that. They accused him of being involved in other hacks and stuff like that, but that really doesn't play out at all in the hearings as far as I could tell. But yet I'm sure the judge is going to include that in her ruling. And so my guess is Assange did not end up with a very fair trial here, and they're going to use this as a rubber stamp at the end of the day, and hopefully it'll be one of the appeals to the higher court in the UK where he could actually maybe earn his freedom here.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We'll definitely continue to update Assange. Even though the testimony and the hearing and stuff won't, we might not be able to update that too much. Certainly we will continue to update his situation. There will still be reporting on this from people like Craig Murray and stuff, and Consortium News, and from us. So people can, look forward to that.
All right. Well, last up today is Afghanistan. The main thing I had on Afghanistan is I have a write-up here by Dan DePetris from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, but a lot of different people in the alternative media have been writing on this general theme that's come out recently, which is retired military brass stay the never-ending course in Afghanistan. And he talks about how, just all these, 4-star, 3-star generals that get on the news programs and carry weight. H.R. McMaster being the main one, Trump's former national security advisor, who I think was fundamental in pushing Trump in his first year as president to, rather than draw down the Afghan war, attempt a little mini surge and, start up the Iron Tempest campaign to bomb all the drug facilities and ramp up the air war there. And so, this is really problematic that all these, former generals are, former generals are coming out and saying this because it's, portrayed in the mainstream media as these are the enlightened experts on Afghanistan, and Trump is the stupid brute that, just comes in and screws everything up. And look, he's maybe about to snatch victory, or snatch victory from I forget how the saying goes.
Snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
There you go. Thank you, Will. Early morning here, my brain's not firing on the all the sayings here. I think this is a real problem, and it seems like they're really trying to push this narrative, I guess, to make sure that Trump can't end this war should he lose the November election, and that it would be Joe Biden the one who, kind of ultimately makes the call whether to end the war or not. And I think we know that they're going to push him to stay forever. And even Joe Biden has kind of said that the plan is to not withdraw from the Middle East, but keep a presence there, even if it's a little bit more drawn down from what it is already. So this is fairly disturbing. Again, H.R. McMaster is the name that comes up. Joseph Votel, I believe he was formerly the commander of CENTCOM. And then
Yeah.
very recently, Stanley McChrystal came out and endorsed Joe Biden, who's the former commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And so, all these things combined, kind of shows that the goal here is, I think, to keep the U.S. in Afghanistan. And it's just so disturbing that, these are the people that the media should more accurately portray as, the people who have slaughtered the Afghanis, the people who have committed violence in Afghanistan. They're the ones who have lost this war. They're the ones who are responsible for the fact that, the Taliban are now more powerful than any time since 9/11 and all that. And yet they're now somehow portrayed in the mainstream media as the only voices that we should listen to on this issue.
Yeah, these jackasses are the very same people who lost the war. They were in there, they commanded this thing, they had a chance to win it and do it, and now they failed. And now they're out of office, and they're saying we need to keep doing the stuff we've done for the last 20 years that have failed. It's so it's infuriating that these people are sitting from the sidelines trying to snipe like this when they had their chance. They were in power. Like H.R. McMaster was like he was a big hawk in the Trump administration, always calling for more pressure on the Taliban, more soldiers, more violence. And it doesn't work. Like, Trump had his little mini surge. There was no, gains from that. And I don't know how they could possibly think that, like, what was it, 13,000 guys when Trump, I think, took office, or the height of his forces there. I don't know how they think that a couple thousand could win when Obama had 100,000 there, and they still couldn't accomplish their goals. And so I don't know, like, for someone like McMaster, I don't know how long would be too long, like, before it's time to give up and come home for this. Like, what, 100 years? That 100 years in Afghanistan still isn't a liberal democracy? Then we can come home and say that we tried. Like, it just seems like after 20 years, you need to pack up and go home and stop with the same strategies over and over. It's really enraging.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe if they were being honest, and I don't know how many of them would be this honest. I think only like a Matt Spoot is this honest, that they're okay with this war taking 150 years, losing 20 or so Americans every year in Afghanistan, killing tens of thousands of Afghan civilians, including children, every year in like essentially a perpetual war, similar to what the U.S. did against the Native Americans, in the founding, where it's just essentially they're fighting this never-ending war. And maybe the goal is like the depletion of the Pashtun population. I'm not sure, what the solution there was obviously just, again, deplete the Native American population until they're, no longer a threat because there's so few of them. And I'm not sure if that's the strategy, but it seems like they're prepared to just essentially let this go on forever and are fine with, again, 20 or so Americans dying every year, tens of thousands of Afghans, and then, children, terrible things that are happening in that country still.
Right.
So,
Billions of dollars too. So.
Yeah, not to mention our tax dollars that, they're throwing away. Isn't it crazy, Will, that they're upset that Trump paid $750 in taxes and not that they wasted $1 trillion on a war? Like, even if Trump had paid
kidding.
all of his money in taxes, like, if they took every asset that Trump had, sold it all off, that would pay for the war for 6 months?
Or what, 15 minutes or something?
Right,
yeah, seriously. Like,
the war in Afghanistan, they get by, they get by cheap on that. Let's say Trump actually has $1 billion. I bet they could,
right.
make that money last and draw it out for a while. But yeah, it's still, compared to what they spend on the war, it's just an insignificant amount of money that, we pay, Trump pays in taxes and all this stuff. And yet, that's oh my God, the money, how could we lose this money? The rich people get away with everything. It's like, no, you're giving all of our money to the rich people by fighting these wars. The defense contractors are the real winners here, along with, the former generals who now work on the boards of these companies. But let's not report the conflicts of interest there in the mainstream media, right? So
yeah, it's crazy. The Washington Post itself, owned by Amazon, now they're trying to cash in on all this military-industrial complex stuff. Meanwhile, while Bezos's publication sells up these wars, there's another conflict of interest for you.
Yeah, well, this is the guy who has profited off of the pandemic. Literally the guy that has billions of dollars to his wealth off of the pandemic, while everybody's small businesses are suffering and going out of business. He owns the Washington Post. He pushes for war. He's getting contracts from the Pentagon. And nobody's concerned about this guy. Everybody's just concerned about, Donald Trump and the Republicans. It's just amazing how he could possibly, get away with at least not being the target of like some public animosity. People are far more concerned about Walmart than Amazon most of the time. And it just seems really foolish, but that's the situation, Will, here. Anything else before we wrap up here?
I think we hit all of it. I mean, the things in Afghanistan, they're having peace talks in Doha, Qatar, between the Taliban and the Afghan government. Those are still kind of like stalling out. They're still trying to figure out, like, even I think I overestimated like how quickly they would be talking about actual issues. I think they're still trying to work through this like procedural stuff. So like we'll continue to update those things. There was a recent visit by Abdullah, like one of these high up people in the government, to Pakistan. That was kind of an interesting. There's some interesting meetings there, but yeah, I think we'll continue updating the stuff as as the weeks go on.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't sound like a lot of people who are actually at the talks are very optimistic at this point. They say there's a lot of the sticking points, and the Taliban are looking for like a political solution before they agree to any ceasefire. And as far as, the reporting from the past 2 or 3 weeks have gone, we're talking about hundreds of deaths on the ground in Afghanistan, a lot of them being fighters, Taliban, Afghan government sources, but also civilians being killed, including by Afghan government airstrikes. And I don't see that slowing down anytime soon, just because they're not making progress in talks. But while these talks are ongoing, knowing that a ceasefire may be coming, my guess is both sides are going to try to get all the territory they can, because once the ceasefire comes, then it gets a hell of a lot harder to take territory. And right, yeah. So, yeah, it could be a violent few months in Afghanistan. And hopefully, at least at the end of it, there's some kind of reward for the people and some kind of, longer term ceasefire where, maybe if Afghanistan stops being a war-torn country, create some wealth, create some prosperity there, and then you could start looking at actual reforms and women gain some freedom and independence in that country. I certainly don't think it's going to come from the end of American rifle, and it certainly hasn't in 20 years. And so another 20 years doesn't seem to make any more progress.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, let's remind everybody where to check out our work. You are a staff writer at RT, and you post all the articles that you write on your Twitter feed every morning at The Will Porter. I'm Kyle Anzalone, news editor at the Libertarian Institute. I post my news roundup every morning at Kyle Anzalone _. Make sure you check out the show at the Libertarian Institute. That's where it's like mostly hosted, and that's where the show notes are. You could also check it out on Twitter at con_interest. On Facebook, we are Conflicts of Interest. YouTube, just Conflicts of Interest. And you can check out patreon.com/conflicts of interest. Will, thanks for doing another show with me, and we'll be back on Sunday or Monday.
Thanks, Kyle. Bye, everybody.